Good Saturday evening, everybody, and welcome into the Auburn Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. This one just went final on the Plains as Auburn gets the best of Ole Miss, 31-20, the final score. A huge win for the Tigers and head coach Brian Harsin, a top 10 win at home as Auburn gets it done. Not a lot of scoring in the second half, but not a lot of scoring needed. Auburn never trailed in this game. Bo Nix looked about as good as you would hope Bo Nix could ever look. Coming off of the bye week, it seemed as though the Tigers were really clicking on all cylinders. Matt, before we really break things down, your initial thoughts after this huge win for Auburn?
I think it was a really solid performance offensively. I thought they carried over the momentum that we saw from the Arkansas game. Really looked pretty similar, although obviously they slowed down a little bit in the second half and struggled a little bit there. But, I think what really sticks out to me the most is that this Auburn defense is really starting to get more comfortable and starting to kind of come into its own and find an identity. I mean, this is an explosive offense. This is a really tough team to hold to just 20 points.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways they really took Ole Miss out of their comfort zone and out of their game plan by getting up so quickly in this game. And you can do that sometimes. I think the ability for Auburn to come out and get a couple of quick scores and a couple of quick stops defensively, suddenly Ole Miss is never playing the game they wanted to play for the entire game. They may have been able to score. They may have been able to move the ball as the game went on, but they were never comfortable. They were never able to call the game they wanted to call.
Yeah.
And I think Auburn just really dictated the pace of this game from the word go.
No question. Speaking on the defense quickly, like you just said, Matt, I mean, this Ole Miss rushing attack, we talked about this in pregame. It ranks first in the Southeastern Conference and third in the country, held to just 156 on the ground, and lots of that coming in the second half, I think. For Auburn to really buckle down and to show resiliency in moments where in teams past for Auburn, you kind of felt like they would let down a little bit, especially on the defensive side. It felt as though this Auburn defense stood tall when necessary, and it was incredibly impressive. I understand there was an injury to Matt Corral for a little while, but still Auburn defensively did everything you needed them to do, and stopping the run was a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think they had a great game plan to stop this season, which was being able to run the ball against a primarily pass coverage oriented defense. And I think Matt Corral has become so central to this offense, and as some of the other weapons have been taken away from Ole Miss, I think Lane Kiffin has had to ask more and more and more of Matt Corral and had to run him more. And I think it's clearly starting to take a toll. I mean, he came back into the game at a certain point, but I don't think his accuracy was there tonight. I think Auburn really made him uncomfortable. They did a great job of getting the pass rush home to him all night. And, I think that's a big part of how you have to stop any dynamic player is just attack him, just make him uncomfortable. And this Auburn defense is getting better as the season goes on at identifying another team's weaknesses and really aggressively attacking them.
Yeah, a balanced attack on the offensive side from Auburn. When we look at what Bo Nix was able to do in the air, 22 of 30, I think he, to start the game, completed like 10 of 12 passes, was extremely impressive and very efficient all throughout the first half. Bo was on the air and in the air and on the ground. Tank Bigsby, super dominant, 140 yards on 23 carries. But can we talk just a little bit about Bo Nix and how much he has really bounced back from that situation in the game against Georgia State, getting benched, and just his resurgence, really collecting himself in what Bo Nix has been able to do, specifically in the last two games. But tonight, I was as impressed as ever with Bo Nix.
Yeah, I mean, 22 of 30 for 276 yards passing and a passing touchdown. But then on the ground, 30 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns on the ground doesn't totally tell the story because Bo had some pretty big losses.
Sure.
Just from kind of, it's the kind of plays I think you just have to settle with Bo Nix at this point. You're going to get a lot of explosive positive plays, and you're going to get a few frustrating big negative plays too. But he seems to more than make up for those over the course of the game. I think Bo's playing more consistently. I don't think he seems as chaotic from week to week and series to series as he did earlier on in the season.
Yeah.
This is kind of who he is at this point, and it's good enough to win a lot of games. I think. We'll get into the schedule I think in a few minutes here, but I think Auburn's got a little bit of a formula here, and I think they have a very clear identity, which is a good thing to have going into November.
Yeah, one thing I want to bring up is Bryan Harsin has been asked week after week after week about Auburn's slow starts. And he has said almost in a sarcastic manner, hey, guys, it's not like we're intentionally doing this. We want to get a fast start offensively. We want to put points on the board early. And credit to Auburn. Now the question might be, okay, are they finishing enough? But hey, let's give credit where it's due. Auburn comes out, immediately scores on the first 2 drives, puts up 28 in the first half. That right there is kind of answering the call when it comes to opening the game with a quick start.
Yeah, they had a great plan to start this game. And that opening drive was basically perfect. Almost nothing went wrong.
Yeah.
And Auburn does do. I've seen a couple of people in here talking about the red zone and Auburn struggling a little bit when they get closer to the goal line. It's kind of been an issue for years now. I don't think they were going to fix that overnight, but I do think Auburn is getting better at scoring from outside the red zone. I think they're getting pretty good at big, explosive, long touchdown plays, and so that's a positive to have. I do think you want to shore up the issues that you're having, and if red zone offense is one of those, then it is. I think in general their run game seems to do better when they're not going for a short yardage situation. I don't think they're bad at it, but I think when the defense fully knows you're going to run the ball, Auburn's had some issues dominating in those scenarios, and I think that's part of why they're having trouble in the red zone and closer to the goal line. But up and down the field between the 20s, this run game was working great tonight. It wasn't always both backs. I think we've kind of gone back and forth game to game from seeing Jarquez Hunter and Tank Bigsby. I think we got a better game from Tank Bigsby tonight, and that's good to see. We haven't seen that, I think, for a couple of weeks now. Overall, this is I think a very balanced offense. And now the receivers are playing more consistency, and they're not dropping easy passes. And Bo Nix, the called runs for Bo Nix are being worked into the offense more and more. The running backs are doing their thing. The running backs are becoming a bigger part of the offense as receivers coming out of the backfield. So there's a lot of things that are for this offense right now. And I think Mike Bobo is choosing good moments to call those different things. I think he seems to have a really good understanding of timing for those play calls.
Yeah, and I think that a few weeks ago when there was frustrations with the offense, frustrations with the quarterback situation, I think that we all knew that we had to sit back a little bit. We lost Matt for a second. He's going to try to restart his Wi-Fi signal, but hang in there with us for a second. But guys, I think that when you look back a couple of weeks at the frustrations that we saw, we knew that this was going to take some time. Bryan Harsin is implementing his new offense coming over from Boise State. It was going to take a little bit of time for Bo Nix to get comfortable. It was going to take time for his assistant, this staff that was pieced together by Harsin to put the pieces in place, get the right guys out there, and that's exactly what he did. And Matt, I was just commenting, we knew a couple of weeks ago, welcome back to the show, we knew a couple of weeks ago that we see you much loud and clear now, that this was going to take some time. Bryan Harsin was going to come in, implement his offense. He had a little bit of an off season, obviously, he got spring ball and all that, but still to get out there and to do it live and in color, it takes time to put all the pieces together. And it seems as though now 9 weeks into the season, Auburn's sitting at 5-2 are the Tigers right now, 6-2. 6-2. I mean, you got to be impressed with how this has come along. It's taken a little bit of time, but I mean, it's going to take time, and the pieces are finally coming together.
I think so. I think that again, I keep using the word identity. It's just kind of the best thing I can think of to describe that this team doesn't look like they're having to make it up as they go. They look like everything they're doing was part of a plan, and it's part of what they do on a regular basis, and that's part of why they're able to execute more consistently, I think. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing to be seeing from your team when you're heading down to the final stretch. I think there are some really good teams in college football right now that, despite having a better record than Auburn, don't have as clear of an identity as Auburn has. And one of them, to me, is Alabama. And if we want to talk about this final stretch for Auburn, I don't know that Auburn has the roster talent that Alabama has. In fact, I'll go ahead and say I don't think they do. I don't think Auburn has as much talent as Alabama. But I do think right now that Auburn has a more clear sense of who they are as a football team than Alabama does. And I think that's what should give Auburn fans a lot of hope about the Iron Bowl right now. Yeah. We're not to the point where I think you can overlook Texas A&M and Mississippi State. I think they're both playing really well right now. They seem like they're figuring out who they are as football teams too.
Sure.
But, obviously Alabama's the biggest hurdle left. It's the one that Auburn knows even if they do everything else right, they still have to beat Alabama at the end of the season in order to get to the SEC championship game. And even though I think there's going to be some things working against them in that game, right now, I think this Auburn team has a lot of confidence and has a lot of buy-in in terms of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And those are things that are going to give them a chance in every game for the rest of the season.
Totally agree. So looking ahead, like you just did, Matt, it's Texas A&M on the road next week, then Mississippi State in Auburn, at South Carolina, and then, of course, the Iron Bowl. One of the biggest things take away from this game, outside of all the positives on the field, is the standings right now. Auburn is just a one-loss team in the SEC. The SEC West, very, very, very much still in contention for Auburn. And really, there's only two teams in the West that can say that right now. It's Alabama and it's Auburn, because they're the only two teams with one loss. Should Auburn win out, the Iron Bowl will be as big as it's ever been. Like we've seen before with the SEC West up for grabs, could be a huge opportunity, and crazier things have happened in the Iron Bowl, especially at Jordan-Hare Stadium. We've seen that time and time again. But I think that you brought up a great point, Matt, in that this team is starting to really put together an identity. They're starting to understand what they are good at. And not every team in the SEC can do that right now. There are many more programs who have more questions than they do answers. Well, Auburn might have started the season with a lot of questions. They're getting their answers now 9 weeks into the year, and this is when you want to play well. This is when it matters most. So, yeah, did Auburn take a couple losses early on? Sure, but it matters most right now. Week 9 to week, 13, whatever it is, 12, this is when you have to rack up these wins. This is when you want to know who you are, know what you're good at. And Brian Harsin, kudos to him, y'all. Let's give credit where he's due right now. He's figuring it out in year 1, and that's pretty impressive.
Well, and I think a lot of credit needs to go to the coordinators that Brian Harsin has assembled on this team too. I think that Mike Bobo just looks like an offensive coordinator that's feeling it right now. That he's very comfortable with his with his personnel that he has, and I think he's calling an offense that plays to their strengths. And I think that they all seem really comfortable doing what he's asking them to do. I think Derek Mason has his unit playing really good football too. I think there were some struggles early. I've seen a comment like from Mark here talking about the secondary being a little soft. That's going to happen. Ole Miss has some really good receivers. Everybody has really good receivers. This in modern football, there's really not too many teams, maybe only Georgia, that just totally shut everybody else down. You're gonna have the other team moving up and down the field on you a little bit. I think that overall, though, it's a defense that is capable of totally derailing a drive with big negative plays with the pass rush and with a secondary that's had a lot of takeaways. They had another one tonight in the end zone that killed a potential scoring drive for Ole Miss. So I think the big playability kind of counteracts the tendency to occasionally give up big plays by this Auburn defense. I mean, I just think you got to be feeling good about where you're at if you're Auburn right now. I saw somebody say that the schedule was I think they said very doable. I think that's a little bit that might be a little bit generous. I don't know that there's too many people who would see Alabama on their schedule still and say it's very doable, but it's there and it's within reach. I mean, Auburn's not going to be favored in that game, but it's not going to be a 2-touchdown underdog either. It's at Auburn. Auburn is playing really good football right now. If they continue to win out, that game is also probably going to be between two top 10 ranked teams. Yep. So I think we are setting up right now. As long as Auburn does not suddenly lose whatever they're doing right now, as long as they do not stumble at some point, I think we're headed for a big time showdown at the end of this season, on par with going back to 2017, where that game was kind of for everything, where it was basically not. I don't look at this point. I don't know if we need to be talking about playoff discussions for Auburn, because a lot would still need to happen with Auburn having 2 losses. But winning the SEC West in your first season under a new head coach would be an enormous accomplishment, and not something that anybody thought was a realistic hope for this team heading into the season.
Yeah, let's not understate that tonight is an enormous accomplishment for Brian.
It is. It's a win against the top 10 team.
This is a big deal. This is a significant deal. I think what is key to Auburn right now is to, as players and as a program, is to not do what we are currently doing, is to not do what fans are currently doing on both sides of the Iron Bowl, and that's to think ahead to November 27th. Auburn needs to take the rest of this season day by day, game by game, because one hiccup and the Iron Bowl doesn't mean squat. And that really goes for both teams. But for Auburn, I mean, one hiccup against Texas A&M, Mississippi State at home, whatever it may be, one loss and the Iron Bowl suddenly means a lot less than necessary should Alabama continue to win out as well. So it's very important for Auburn to not get ahead of themselves, kind of like we are, but we're allowed to because we're not on the team.
We're allowed to do that.
We get paid to do it. But as players, they have to keep their head in every moment moving forward and not get down the line, because it's easy to start to do that. It's easy to start to, start to think that way as to what things look like a month from now.
I think so too. I do think again, look, so far Auburn seemed like a very focused team. I think after tonight, it's possible some hype might start to creep into the building. And Brian Harsin's going to have to do a good job of keeping that stuff at bay. But, there are 2, make no mistake, just because they're not Alabama, there are 2 very difficult opponents coming up that Auburn will have tough games against, whether they win or lose. They're not going to be easy pushover wins. These are not cupcakes coming up here in the next 2. South Carolina's kind of a cupcake. But Texas A&M and Mississippi State are games that Auburn will legitimately need to play clean, sound football and continue to keep the intensity that they've been playing with in the last several games here. And we'll see. We'll see if they can do that. They also need to keep everybody healthy. And that's, I think this is a very well-rounded and deep team, but I cannot state enough how important Bo Nix is to this team right now. And I think keeping Bo Nix healthy is very, very important. He seems pretty sturdy. He seems pretty tough to hurt. But they need to keep it that way. They need to keep Bo Nix safe.
Yeah, and teams like Texas A&M, and first of all, playing at Texas A&M in front of over 100,000 in Kyle Field is not easy in College Station.
Terrence, I will say it. I will say that South Carolina's cupcake. I'm sorry, they're really bad. They're really bad. They lost to some unspeakably bad other football teams this year, and they really, really struggled against Vanderbilt. So this is not a good South Carolina team, but that's fine. I mean, you need a 1 week of a breather at least before this season is over.
Yeah. Well, while we're sitting here talking about, Bama and Auburn being the only two contenders, Texas A&M still wants to be a piece of the pie. They
Sure.
are a 2-loss team, but
And
all
if
it
they
takes is
beat,
Bama to slip up one time, and
yep,
they have the tiebreaker there against the Tide.
if
So
Texas A&M beats Auburn and Auburn beats Alabama, Texas A&M could very well win the SEC West. So that game.
absolutely.
That game is pretty high stakes. It's not going to get the
Yes.
hype that tonight's game did, but that is a pretty big game next week.
Oh, I think it will. I think it'll absolutely get the hype that tonight's a game. And before we go, I wore my orange. I'm not an Auburn fan, I'm not a Bama fan. I just cover the teams, but I have to say the face masks were legit.
This is a good look.
I think those should be here to stay. Just my opinion. I thought they looked pretty good under the lights.
I liked it. I thought it was cool. Let's keep mixing it up.
Yep.
Keep throwing in new details to that uniform. I'm all for it.
Yep, absolutely. I'm sure recruits and players are as well. But guys, Auburn gets it done at home. A huge win, a huge top 10 win for Brian Harsin and company. 31-20, the final over the Rebels. Auburn improves to 6-2, 3-1 in the SEC. Matt, any final thoughts before we go?
Big win. Let's see how this team finishes the season. I think we have certainly seen. If you've got a long enough memory as an Auburn fan, you have seen really good Auburn teams struggle in November before. We'll see. We've also seen Auburn teams struggle early and play the lights out in November. So let's see what kind of team this is. Let's see what the story of this team is.
We will certainly find out beginning as early as next week when the Tigers take a trip to Texas A&M. But guys, thanks so much for tuning into the Auburn Postgame Show. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. This is the Auburn Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of your weekend, and happy Halloween.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.